Well, I think we'll go ahead and get started. It is noon on a cloudy Friday day with more rain expected. But we have a delightful presentation today by Amanda Hall, and she is a master gardener from the class of 2011. And Amanda is going to share her presentation, Shady Food, which I adore that title, Edible Gardening in Part Sun and Shade. She's going to share all of her shady experiments that she's been conducting in her garden for many, many years. So with that, Amanda, so if anyone happens to come late and would like to ask questions, please post them in the chat box below, and we will answer questions at 12:45. Okay, so take it away, Amanda.
All right. So my name is Amanda Hall, and my presentation is Shady Food, Edible Gardening in Part Sun to Shade. Shade is obviously a little bit tricky. I'm sure everybody knows that, but anyway, we'll get into that. So I'll start with my first slide. It's just an outline of the things I'm going to go over. So concepts, expectations, kind of a timeline about what you're doing in the garden, some trees and shrubs, herbs, cool weather plants, warm weather plants, mushrooms, and then just finish up with some options and resources. So with that, let's jump right into some concepts. Okay, so the concept is just to grow some food in part sun, part shade, maybe. You know, it's a little bit trickier the shadier it gets, but we'll get into that a little more as we go. So the idea is, if you're like me, you live in an urban space where there are trees, and you have houses and neighbors' houses and neighbors' trees. You're going to have limited sun, and you're going to have limited space. You may also not live urban, but you may live on a treed landscape. So I'll talk. So this kind of works for either of those things. A couple of things to keep in mind, that when you're growing for plants for the fruit or the root, they're going to require more sun than those that you're growing for leaves and stems. Seedlings need more sun just to get a strong start. And then some ways to just increase the sun in your space would be to reflect that light. So using mirrors. I have a friend who has this lovely old mirror hanging in her landscape on, I think it's on her fence, and it just reflects some of that light into the rest of her garden. You can use foil to do that. It's a good idea to paint any kind of fences or structures white, because that will help reflect that light and brighten it a little bit more. So those are just a few tricks that you can use to increase the light in your area. A couple of other things that are helpful to use are cold frames, because if we're in a shadier space, and we have that canopy, one of the things that we're probably going to have a little more luck with are the crops that grow in the cooler seasons, because we don't have the competition with the leaves on the trees, assuming they drop their leaves. So you've got cold frames. You can use cloches and row covers just to extend that, and also to warm your soil. So if you want to start seeds outside in the soil, most of the seeds are very particular about the temperature that they will germinate in. So those are some things just to help us have a little more control over being able to grow. And then don't be afraid to experiment. That's all I've done. This is my passion, not my profession. So I just enjoy trying new things. I'm always curious to see what will happen if I try something, and that's probably why I test software for a living. But I think it's a good thing for anybody to do. I feel like when we're young, we're very curious, and as we get older, sometimes we lose that curiosity. Maybe just by necessity, or we don't have time to indulge in it, but just don't be afraid to experiment. So, all right, let's move on to expectations. First and foremost, the most important thing to do is be realistic. It's easy to get excited, and I am very guilty of it because I am a plant enthusiast and I love going and looking at them, and then I want to try different things, and then I have to kind of rein it in and remember that I need to be realistic about what I can do. So you have to consider how much time you have, whether, like myself, you're working full time or you work part time, or maybe you don't, but you still have, family obligations and things. Just consider the amount of time that you have and be realistic about it, and consider your son, because that's going to change things. But you can experiment, but don't set your expectations too high. Another thing is just trying to edit to increase the sun. So something that I did just a couple weeks ago is I had a tree guy come out and just prune the tree just to allow more light to filter through it. So, and things are changing in my landscape. We've had a couple of trees taken down. The neighbors took down a tree. So things are changing, and they're going to change, but the things that you can control are editing your own landscape. And if you have trees, you can certainly prune them, so that you can get a little more light through them. So another thing with food gardening is to consider what you want to grow, like what things you use when you're cooking, what are some staples of your diet, and even things that you would like to have as maybe staples of your diet. But that goes into experimenting and researching those things. Don't expect to have immediate success. There's going to be work with it, so just have patience and be okay with it. You'll want to test your soil, and there's a good chance that you're going to have to amend the soil, or at least create mounds, or it kind of depends on where you're growing. So also consider your water availability. So when you're thinking about where you're planting things, and part of that is going to be determined by what it is, how tolerant it is of part shade or part sun or whatever. But what you have to consider is your water availability. If you don't have an irrigation system, you're going to want to make sure that anything that obviously needs more water is closer to your water source. And other things that are more drought tolerant can go out a little bit further into your landscape. So consider when you're planning this, keep in mind where your water sources are and what you're planting based on that. Another thing to consider is that there are going to be disease and pest problems. There's just really no way around that, especially when it comes to food. But what you can do is just, again, it goes back to determining what you want to grow, and studying a little bit about what pests those crops may have and what diseases they might be more susceptible to. And anything is more susceptible to pests and diseases if it is stressed. So again, that goes back to the plant's tolerance for part sun, part shade, and then there are other things to consider as well, like whether it's a root or whether it's, so that goes into your growing medium and fertilizing and things like that. But needless to say, less sun is probably going to impact the size and the yield of anything that you get. So again, and if you have plenty of space, then I say, once you figure out and some of the things that you want to grow a lot of it. If you know that you're going to use a lot of it, if you don't need a lot of it, like I don't, then you know, you can do a little, you can be a little more free to grab probably more varieties and put them out in different places. But part of that is when you go to, you know, whether you seed, if you get seed, you're going to have plenty, so you can try things in all sorts of different places. If you are buying transplants, then you're probably at least going to get a 4-pack. Usually when you go to a nursery or garden center generally. So, you know, you can spread them out a little bit, and that way you can kind of determine what areas things are going to grow better in just by trying it. Okay, so the main thing is just try to be realistic. And that's all we can do, I guess. So let's move into the timeline. So I haven't put specific dates because it moves, the dates move slightly from year to year, but not by much. So I feel like fall is a really big prep time for the next season, and I feel like I still struggle with that a little bit. But fall is sort of mid to late September to mid to late December. And that's a time when you want to kind of clean up, but don't get crazy, because there are actually beneficial insects that will overwinter on leaf litter and some of those things. So one of the things about vegetable gardening is that you do have to be cognizant about cleaning things up. But one of the things that like I know that I have to get rid of some of the leaves, because obviously if we're gardening in part shade, we've probably got some trees around us and we're going to have leaves. But maybe finding a space or identifying a space in your landscape that you can, you know, have a leaf pile. Like I said, you don't have to save all of your leaves, you know, maybe just some of them, just so you don't lose all of your potential beneficials that might be overwintering on those. Planning, I'm not always the best with that, but it is actually really important to do so that you are ready to go when it's time to get started. So you want to start planning your garden a little bit, figuring out especially if you've already tried growing some things and you haven't had a lot of success, you want to, you know, reconsider where it's at and where you want to put it. You want to kind of maybe prepare some of those beds. If you want to try high tunnels, cold frames, any of those things, this is the time to kind of get those set up and built. Also, do some research about the varietals and decide on which plants you want. So that's kind of the time to do that. And you can order seeds. I have that under winter, but there's no reason you can't order seeds in the fall. There's definitely some overlap there, because winter is mid to late December to mid to late March. And that's the time when, you know, you'll, again, with ordering seeds, that can be fall, winter. There's overlap in that, but, you know, plan for starting your seeds, whether you're going to do it indoors or outdoors. And that can be a little tricky, but full disclosure, I have not gone down the rabbit hole of starting seeds indoors. There are a number of reasons for that, and I'm not going to say I'll never do it, but I maybe am a little bit of a lazy gardener. I kind of like to be able to just put things in the soil, and I feel like if that's a good place for them, they're going to come up and they're going to do okay. If it's not, well, I'll have to try something different next time. I think starting seeds inside, I imagine it could probably be addictive, and someday, maybe when I have more time, that's something I'll do. But at this point, I just haven't haven't gone down that rabbit hole. So everything depends on, what the plant is, the days to maturity, germination, soil, soil temperatures, all those things kind of beyond the scope of this, though I can digress. But so let's move into spring, which is going to be mid to late March to mid to late June. You can, through this whole time, I mean, these are pretty, you got about, 3 months here. So plant seeds, you can plant transplants. There will be things that you'll be able to harvest during that time, and you can do some succession sowings, of seeds. So, and especially outside. So maybe if you did start something indoors, and then you brought those transplants out and put them in to an area and you save some space, so that once those start to kind of, because those have gotten started, but maybe in that time, the soil outside has warmed up enough that you could actually direct sow some seeds outside, that will start giving you these successions. So that's a good time to do that. And then we move into summer, so mid to late June to mid to late September. Continue with those succession sowings, harvesting, and then start, sowing your cool weather crops, and getting those started. Some of those, depending again on the seed, if you're starting from seed, which probably by then you will, because you're not going to be able, well, you may or may not be able to find them. It depends on the nursery. But if you're going to sow the seeds, some of them may require a cooler period, or if they do require some cool stratification, you can use the refrigerator to do that. So just look at your varietal, read your seed packets, and those will tell you what you need to do. All right, so let's talk about some trees and shrubs. I think most of the time when we think of edible gardening, and certainly if we're thinking about it in the context of part shade, part sun, or shade, which again, shade is very tricky. I don't want to tell anybody not to try it, but your chances of getting a good yield are not great. But some trees and shrubs that will tolerate part shade, part sun. There are currants, gooseberries, elderberry. I don't have personal experience with any of those, but my research has been that those are ones that will tolerate less sun. Another good one, and it's a native, is a Paw Paw. They're a smaller kind of shrub, like a large shrub, small tree. It kind of depends on your resource on whether they call it a large shrub or a small tree. But it's a nice native that does not get huge, and it grows, I think it tends to grow more kind of on the edges of woods and things like that. So it's a little bit more of an understory kind of tree. And it's supposed to be, I think I read that, I haven't actually tried the fruit, but I think I read that it's supposed to be a cross between a banana and I don't know. It was something, it sounded good. So I thought, well, that might be something I'll have to consider, seeing if I can find a place to put one of those. Another tree is an American hazelnut. And again, those don't get large, 15 to 18 feet tall by 10 to 12 feet wide. And they will take some part shade. So now again, I don't know, the yields are going to be different based on the sun, all these things, and your soil conditions, and how the tree is doing, and all these things, but it's worth, it might be worth a shot. So another one is a serviceberry, and I am absolutely going to put a serviceberry in. I have a friend that just loves them, and she and I had talked about it, and I haven't figured out quite where I'm going to put one yet. But after I saw hers, I was in love with the tree. And when I saw it, it did not have any leaves on it or any fruit or anything. It was still pretty cool outside, but it just the form of it, and you can get it in, you know, more of an upright form, or you can get it in a more like sort of a multi-stem form, and that's what she had. And I just thought it was pretty fabulous. So, and it is native. It gets a white bloom in the spring. So, you know, it would be a great option for, it's great for food, but it's also great for maybe replacing, you know, some of the non-natives that bloom in the spring, because it does get a nice white bloom. And then it gets berries. And my understanding, what I was told, is that the berries taste like a cross between a blueberry and a boysenberry. And I thought, well, sign me up, because that sounds really good. And it's another tree. It'll take full sun to part shade. It typically grows in more of an understory, as more of a kind of an understory on the edge of wood. So my friend had it, I think hers was right near her house. I mean, kind of right up against the house on the north side. So it wasn't getting a ton of sun, but she said she got really, you know, it bloomed well. She got good berries. She and the neighbor kids were eating the berries. So that's a good one. And then another option, if you are, if you're wanting to try some shrubs maybe that require a little more sun, they can be trained to grow cordoned or kind of fanned against a structure. And I have seen that. I have not tried it, but it would increase your light and it would reduce the dampness, which is obviously going to help with the keeping the damp, you know, you'll have better airflow through there and you'll get more light. So anyway, there are some trees and shrubs. So let's move into herbs. I am a big fan of herbs. I feel like they're kind of workhorses. I mean, they do really well. They're not persnickety. I've had great luck with herbs. I have right now out in my raised bed, I have an oregano plant that overwintered out there, and it's beautiful, despite the fact that where I'm at, and maybe where I don't know who's going to be watching this, but where I'm at, we're all gardening in the shade right now and in the rain. So so everything is you know, everything's in the shade right now, but the oregano is doing great. I went out and cut quite a bit off the other day. Some other herbs, parsley, chives. I have chives that I didn't clean out one of my pots, and the chives overwintered in there, and it's growing right now. So who knew? I have thyme out there, which is going crazy, and I tried a couple different kinds of thyme because I just think it smells amazing, and all of those are doing well. Basil, dill, cilantro. I've had good luck with all of these. When it does get a little bit warmer, like with basil, it might try to bolt. I try to kind of keep it trimmed a little bit because, you know, that way it'll just stay a little bit shorter and get a little, it does a better job of being a little bushier that way. But oops, sorry, mint. Mint is a great one. There's I think it's called mint julep, is one that I have grown, and I keep it in a pot. I would recommend that you keep it in a pot, because if it goes into your soil, it can take over. So I would just recommend keeping that in a pot. Rosemary, I will say, I've grown it and it's done fine. It does not get as large as it would in full sun, but it grows. That's why I love herbs. They kind of are like, I don't care, just they just grow, and they're not real picky about the soil or a lot of things. They're great. So again, research with the varietals and experiment. All right, so let's talk about some cool weather plants. I've listed some. Getting into varietals, it's like going down a rabbit hole. So I didn't want to get carried away with that. I just wanted to give some general ideas about the cool weather varieties. So, you have the leafy greens, and some of those, arugula is an example, will grow even when it gets warmer. And in fact, it's better if you're growing them when it's warmer to have them in part shade or, a more shaded area, because it prefers a cooler growing condition. So that's a good one. And my dad has grown that. He loves arugula, and I like it too, but he really loves it. It's kind of got a nice peppery taste to it, but I have seen him growing it in a raised bed under a tree, so in the summer. So it will continue to produce. Now, I think that the taste will probably change some. It might get more sort of spicy and peppery, but it's one, and there are a couple of others that will do the same. As far as root vegetables, don't crowd them. And they are one that you definitely want to watch your varietals, because, and it depends on your soil. So for me, I have very compacted clay soil. I have to amend all the time. So with a root vegetable, like especially like carrots or something, you want to know that you're putting them in a space that they're going to actually be able to grow, because it's not really going to be able to push through hard compacted soil. So you're going to want to amend or put those in, a mound or, a raised bed or something. But definitely don't crowd them, and be considerate of your soil. Climbers are great, just because you can put them on a trellis, and depends on how tall your trellis is, but they can kind of reach for some sun. So they can tolerate, some varietals can tolerate less sun, but also because they're climbing, they can climb toward the sun. And if you have a trellis, paint it white so it gets more of that light, and lets some of those pole beans and peas grow up that to get to some of that light. You can also grow bush beans, because some of these, they're small enough you can put them in pots, so that's something you have a little more control over how much sun they get, but they'll tolerate less sun. Now asparagus is something I haven't tried. I would like to, and I did see some, where was I? I was at a garden last month, and I saw an asparagus plant, and it was not in full sun. But they are more of a perennial. So, if you want to grow asparagus, you're going to have to figure out where you want to put it, and it's going to stay there for a while before you're actually going to be able to harvest it. Garlic, I have garlic. It's growing out there right now at the edge of my raised bed. And I literally just went to the grocery store. I bought some organic that was grown in the US. And this was last year. And I just pulled those cloves off there and put them in the ground. And I feel like it was just days before it started coming up. So I did, it's not full sun. So I'm curious to see when I do go to harvest it, what it's going to look like. But it was just kind of fun to try it. So Another thing to consider, because there's not as much sun, and a lot of the food crops do prefer more sun, is to look for varietals that are going to be disease resistant and that say that they'll take part sun or part shade, or I even have, there was something I was looking at. Oh, it's an herb, cilantro. It's one that it will say right on it that it's, full sun to part shade. So, so just watch your varietals. Maybe, and this is probably more for fruiting ones, but, well, no, because we've got roots. So varieties that maybe are a little bit smaller and have fewer days to maturity will help. And all of this is dependent on so many factors. Like, right now we're getting so much rain that everything's, I don't know that it would matter what the varietal was. I think everything is struggling not to drown, but that's just something to keep in mind. So the planting early spring for a summer harvest, and then plant again in the summer, like mid to late summer, for fall and winter harvests. And like I keep saying, research and experiment. It doesn't hurt. That's the beauty of gardening. It's very forgiving. Okay, so some warm weather plants. So I listed some of the cool weather plants that you can also kind of will continue. And you can succession sow some of those. A lot of things are going to want to bolt, and then the taste is not going to be great. But if you put them in an area where they're not getting as much sun and there's a little more air circulation, then you can probably still manage to harvest some. Nightshades like tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, potatoes, those are a little trickier. And you want to look at varietals, and you do want to keep them smaller. And just a note on nightshades, and I just say this for anyone who maybe has, pets or kids, but if you're, especially if you're growing from seed or anything, and the seedlings are actually toxic, so just be aware of that. But as far as tomatoes, since most people are, I think, fans of tomatoes, grape, there's cherry, there's Roma. The Matt's Wild is one that Jean told me about, so I had not even heard of that varietal, so I haven't tried it, but she has nothing but good things to say about it. So peppers, same way, keep them a little bit smaller, shorter maturity days. And so, bell, I would say I've had very mixed experience with bell peppers. Jalapenos have done fairly well, and I've also gotten some banana peppers, but those are a little bit smaller. And there's manzano, which I have not tried, so I can't really attest to that, but there are a few. Warm weather are just going to be a little bit more difficult because they tend to like lots of heat and lots of sun. So, but again, just you can experiment with them. There are so many varietals out there that there's no reason not to. So, okay, let's move on to mushrooms. So I had to include mushrooms because I don't know that there's anything shadier than a mushroom, and it just grows in cool, dark, humid spaces. So you can grow them in a basement, you can grow them under a sink in a cabinet. I mean, it just doesn't get any shadier than that. So if you want, if you have a space that's conducive outdoors, which is tricky because, again, controlling for all those variables can be difficult. But if you try outdoors, because of the varying conditions, you're going to potentially be waiting maybe six months to 3 years to harvest. So indoors, if you want to, and I really think that those, I haven't tried it myself, but I think those would be maybe even a fun thing for, as an experiment with kids or something, because I think a good time to grow those is, even during the winter, if you do have a basement or, a cool, dark, humid space that, stays somewhat cool, and it depends on which mushroom, but you can grow them indoors, especially these good culinary varieties that are used a lot, like those white button mushrooms, which are pretty much what you see anytime you go in the store. If you go look for mushrooms, those are there. There's portobello, the baby portobello, the shiitake, cremini, any of those can be grown indoors. There are a lot of different kits. When I started looking into that, I was kind of shocked. And there's, even I even found, what's his name? I found a site, I'm blanking. Anyway, there's a lot available for as far as growing mushrooms. All of them have a little different substrate that they prefer, but all you have to do is find out what that is, and the kits come with all of it, so it takes the guesswork out of that. And the button mushrooms are actually supposed to be one of the easiest to grow. So yeah, mushrooms, I feel like maybe we don't think about that when we think about gardening for food. They just, and maybe people do. It wasn't something that I initially thought of, because you think outside, or you think of, going and hunting for, is it moral or anyway. So anyway, I thought those would be kind of fun to end with, because the shady food, they like shade, they like dark. So let's go ahead and talk about some other options and resources. So just try to think outside the box when you're planting. Don't feel like you have to, identify one spot, that gets the most sun, and then plant rows, and that, don't worry about that. I mean, you can do that most certainly, but you can also, incorporate a lot of these into your landscape. So, borders usually have a little more light, because, the borders are, near the drip line, maybe of your trees, or, maybe even bordering a walkway or anything. It's possibly going to get more light, and it's a good way to just, it's a good way to do some companion planting, and just incorporate the food into the landscape. And there are some really attractive lettuces, and some of these are they're really pretty, and basils, so don't be afraid to experiment with where you're putting it, and mix it with some of your other plants, whether it be some of your perennials or some of your annuals in your borders and along the edges of your beds, your perennial beds. Growing in containers, there are tons of varietals now for growing in containers, and I have grown, I think, every single herb that I listed in containers, or in a raised bed, or in the ground. So they're just, like I said, I feel like they're workhorses. They'll produce and grow no matter what. raised beds are great because you can control the soil conditions, you can control the soil. And they just, like I said, I have compacted soil, so I'm always struggling with amending the soil. And then when we get rains like this, it's like everything just washes away and I'm back to dealing with that compacted clay. So mounds, which I say mounds, but it's like a raised bed without a frame. And those are ones that depends on your slope. So consider where you're putting them, what the slope's going to be like, and how deep they need to be. Once you get things growing in their roots, you know, depending on the root system, but they'll hold it pretty well. So as long as you're not on a steep slope, you know, at this point, it's, you know, I'm not going to encourage anybody to, or tell people that they need to go out and buy kits for raised beds or anything like that, or, you know, the price of lumber and different things is, you know, it's a little bit higher right now to do those things. So there's no reason you can't just mound the dirt and the, you know, compost and whatever your planting medium is, and then plant into it, or, you know, seed it and go. And I just wanted to mention companion planting and integrated pest management, because I don't use any kind of pest control. I don't do it. I don't spray chemicals. I just don't. It's not something that I do. I feel like that goes back to maybe me being a lazy gardener or something, but mostly it's that I don't want to use chemicals. I have been doing a little bit of research, and I know there are some good natural options, some bacteria that are good for using for certain pests and things. So, you know, I try to stick to natural, if anything at all, or I just, like I said, I'm not a good coddler, so I'm kind of like, put it out there and, you know, it's got to kind of take care of itself. I mean, I obviously am going to help it along until it gets going, if it's going to get going, but I'm not going to get crazy about trying to make it work if it's just not going to work. So just something to consider. And then I think I've mentioned the cold frames before, great way for extending your season. And then I listed some good resources. There's a Kansas garden guide, and I have it, but I'm not sure it would show up very well if I tried to even hold it up to the camera, so I'm not going to do that. But it's excellent for Kansas. It breaks up the state into different zones and tells you when to plant things and when things need to be harvested, and, you know, it goes into detail about soil amending and all these things. I really can't say enough good things about it. So I would definitely point anyone to that. Obviously, your local county extension is a great resource. There's a horticulture hotline. I'm guessing most extension offices have the horticulture hotline, so you can always call and ask questions. And then I have to give a shout out to Bree Arthur. And I met her, so she's written some books and she has a website. And I met her at a garden symposium last year in March before the pandemic. And I really enjoyed her talks. I bought a couple of her books. She grows, now her conditions are probably different, but she grows even grains. She grows all kinds of things. So I think that's a really good resource for anybody who's interested in foodscaping. She really, really knows a lot, and she's done a ton of experimenting, and you know, she has the education and the background in this where I don't. So so I would definitely, I have to give a shout out to her. And she even mentioned, I think I read in one of her books that she even had something, eggplants growing on hydrangea or something. And I remember I was just shocked because I thought, I think of hydrangeas as being a little more of a shade plant, and I don't think of eggplants being that way. So anyway, that's just kind of a, another option of to look at. But I will say, if you're going to go online and do research, just be careful about the resource that you're using. Try to stick to .edu or something that's associated with an extension, or just be cognizant about that, because there's a lot of bad information out there, and you don't want to be planting something that you're just going to really lament. So just be careful about that. So anyway, I guess we'll go ahead and wrap it up. If there are any questions, I will do my best to answer them, and I'm just going to reiterate, this is my passion, not my profession. So.
Well, I want to thank you for sharing your passion. It is infectious, okay? You've got us motivated to experiment. So we had some wonderful comments that you provoked in us. Sharon mentioned that she has planted 6 berry bushes in a shady spot, hoping to get 1 pie. So as you said, it depends on which berry and all the other factors, the microclimates and so forth that go into your area. Darlene wanted to point out that pawpaws, of course, are grown at the Monarch Watch Garden. And I want to warn people that they do pop up, okay? So you do need some extra space, or else you're going to spend a lot of time digging out seedlings, because they do spread quite a bit, but they are yummy fruits. So yes, definitely worth growing. Sharon also mentioned a dwarf service berry, which I think is great, and says she has a 3-foot tall dwarf growing in her shady spot. So she provided a link to the Missouri Botanical Garden in the chat. So that's something I know I'd like to check out and try, because again,
Missouri Botanical is great. I go to Missouri Botanical for almost everything.
Exactly. Right.
Did Sharon purchase her dwarf service berry in Kansas or Missouri?
I purchased it at Skinner's Nursery in Topeka.
Ah, thank you for the
where
tip.
they had it. It's called a Regent, was the cultivar.
Okay.
And I did have one thing I found that's working quite well, and you mentioned this, Amanda, is gooseberry. I've planted that in, I have in between houses, that section. So I think what's helped though is, even though it's shady for a good portion of the day, it gets some pretty intense sun in the afternoon, and that seems to help to have, even though it's just a few hours of sun, it gets that really intense sun. I don't know if that really makes a difference, but
yeah, I think it does, and that's something else to consider. I mean, our atmosphere is changing. It has been changing for a very long time. So that light that's coming from the sun is, it's more intense than it historically has been. So that's going to make a difference too.
Amanda, I was wondering if, I'm sorry. I was wondering if you'd have experimented with comfrey.
I have not.
Because I tried, I forget why I bought it. Partly because, herb and pretty flower, and I think it might have been beneficial for something. I can't remember now. And I planted it in shade, and I think it did well for a year, and then it, petered. And I wasn't sure if it's partly because it's an annual or a perennial. I couldn't remember.
I'm not sure.
Like you say, you experiment, and I was thinking about buying another plant and putting it in a different spot that might get a little bit more sun and see what happens.
Yeah, I really think experimenting is the best thing to do, because things are constantly changing, and especially if we're in an urban setting. I had my neighbors, so they had someone come, and I was shocked at how much the person cut off of their oak trees, or 2 oak trees.
Wow.
in the front yard. And I remember looking at it the day he was doing it, and I thought, he's going to be done at some point. Or I thought he was done. And then I heard him fire up the saw again. And I thought, how much more? Are you just going to leave like this tree thing there with no limbs on it? Pretty intense. So, you know, my light has changed just because of what they've done. And they also pruned pretty hard on the maple in the back. So,
Good neighbors. Yeah. Other questions?
Well, I had one observation that I'm trying this year, and maybe Amanda, you've done this. I found you mentioned the herbs, and so what I'm trying to do in between the houses part, in between my new berry bushes I'm trying to grow, is I'm trying herbs that I actually don't need a lot of, but will provide some aesthetic interest and something for the butterflies. So like parsley, I mean, I don't use that much parsley. It's just a little bit of garnish. So if it's in the shade and doesn't grow very big, then that's okay.
Mhm.
And I'm doing the same thing with fennel and rainbow chard. I'm trying. I'm sure the chard might not work so well, but I figure things like parsley, those herbs that you just need a little bit of flavoring, it doesn't matter if they get big or
Mhm.
not.
exactly. And they're great to use, just like you're saying. I mean, they're a plant, they're green, they're, you know, and the beauty of them is that they're not just there to look at. You can actually go snip some and bring them in and put it in your food.
Have you had the rainbow chard before?
Have I?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, no, I have used chard. I had it in a pot in the summer, and it did fine. I was kind of surprised because it was on my patio, so it did get some sun, but it was not full sun by any means.
I've not
and it
heard of
did
the
fine.
rainbow.
I don't know. It's just a variety I saw in the store. It's just real colorful. And I've heard in the past people talk about it as planting it just amongst your ornamentals for some food. And so I thought I'd give it a try because I grew it in a pot in the sun and it did great. But I thought I had read somewhere that it might take a little bit of shade. So I thought I'd just try it.
Yeah, I think it was actually on the list. There was the chard, and I had it with ornamentals in a pot on the
Okay.
patio that is not full sun. So, and it's really well. So
These are such terrific ideas. My head is spinning on where can I put this and that, and you know, like trying to create spots, and like you say, the containers. I can elaborate a little bit on Matt's wild cherry tomatoes. I bought a plant from some locally, probably, I don't know, 25 years ago, planted it, and it has been reseeding for me ever since in part shade. And it just blows me away. And last year I planted in the backyard. Last year I had seedlings in the front yard. So the birds are moving the seeds as well. And so I grabbed them, put them in containers, and I had more fruits. And it was just fabulous. But I do think I need to find more seeds or plants because as the shade gets deeper, you know, they can't tolerate certain amounts of shade, of dark shade.
yeah, I'm curious to try that one.
Oh, they're so yummy. They're just little itty bitty miniature cherry tomatoes. They're
Which is
so
perfect.
sweet and tasty. Yeah, and they sprawl, you know, so you put them in a cage and in the container or in the ground, and they just enjoy themselves.
You probably
What's that plant again? What's it called again?
Matt's wild cherry tomatoes. It's
Okay.
because Matt discovered them someplace. I can't remember the story. Just Google it and you'll find examples of Matt's wild cherry tomatoes, and they are wild. I mean, they're wonderful.
So it's listed here.
Yeah. Because I always assumed that tomatoes must have 8 hours of full sun, you know, and of course everyone wants fresh tomatoes. And so I just found them to be a wonderful alternative or example of something that does handle part shade just fine.
So I have to say, since you brought up the tomatoes, my mother-in-law last year, and she definitely has part shade. It's kind of terraced in the backyard, and she grew a pot, and I don't know what the varietal was, but she had it was some kind of bush tomato, and she had some basil in it, but I will preface with this: she is definitely the queen of watering and fertilizing. So the plant looked amazing. I mean, it was looked very healthy and happy, and it did put on fruit. But I think because there wasn't enough sun, they weren't ripening. So she got some good sized tomatoes, but they were all green. So we just had some fried green tomatoes.
There you go. Perfect. Yeah. Yeah. Any other comments, questions that people would like to add?
I think the only other comment I would make is that it really helps, and I'm really terrible at this. I promised myself this year that I would track my sun so I could find out just how much sun versus shade I have, because you have an idea in your head and you think, but I'm probably wrong. But of course I promise, it's like New Year's resolutions. I promised I'd do it this year, and I did a couple days, and then of course it started raining, and so I have no idea, but it's a good thing to do. If you can make yourself do it, stay home for a day and track your sunlight in your yard. That's very helpful.
I've debated about doing that. And like you say, I'm a lazy gardener when it comes to that, because I figure trees keep growing, right? So I would have to do it every year. Because I have, neighbors' trees as well as my own. But I agree with you, Sharon, that it's a really worthwhile activity to do. And there are several other master gardeners I know of who have done that in their yard. So you can exactly place, here's the particular plant or vegetable, as you say, Amanda, that can grow in 4 hours of sun, depending upon if it's morning sun or if it's afternoon sun or evening sun. I mean, it like you say, all those factors have to be, worked in. So I keep imagining, Sharon, did you use an Excel sheet? I mean, I don't even know how to do this. I mean, you have to create a map of your yard, I assume. And
well, that's the ideal. And I just was writing down in a notebook like this year, and I've managed to do bloom times this year. So I've managed to jot down notes for bloom times, but I did not have enough discipline to track the sun. So maybe next time I will try that.
Good tip.
Mm-hmm.
Good tip. Okay.
Thank you, Amanda.
Really wonderful. Thank you so much, Amanda. And thank you, Sharon, as well, for your tips and hints and links and so forth, advice. Because I think there's many more people who are dealing with this exact same situation, Amanda, where we have, part shade, part sun. How the heck do you get vegetables to grow under those conditions? So thank you so much for a very thorough and fascinating presentation that gives us lots of plant ideas and lots of ways of making it happen in our yards. Really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. And like I said, just experiment.
Exactly.
That's
the takeaway. Research and experiment your little heart out. Don't be afraid to experiment. Thank you so much, Amanda. And thank you as well to other folks here. Appreciate it very, very much. Until the next public speaker, Bureau Garden Hour, will bid everyone adieu. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, thank you.